I'm a man who's carried more metal than memory over the years. Somewhere along the line, I learned that trust in a weapon isn't built on admiration. It's built on the moments when hesitation could have ended everything. When the job shifts toward direct pressure, and you need something that settles into your hands without asking for permission, AK-12 becomes that link you return to more often than you'd admit. It doesn't try to impress you. It just locks into the shoulder like it already understands what's expected. The balance leans forward, noticeable from the first moment. The barrel pulls, but not enough to bother you, giving a steady line on target without twitchy overcorrection. Early training with it always reminds you this isn't a light, forgiving tool. The metal moves with a dense, deliberate weight, almost checking whether you're ready to treat it seriously. But the real truth shows up outside the range. On long shifts, soaked gear, a strap digging into your collarbone, gloves wet down to the skin, the AK-12 never disappears. You feel every ridge, every corner that snags on webbing when you're switching sides too fast. Every ounce dragging at your pace. During long strings of fire, the recoil doesn't break your stance, but it doesn't fade either. It's a thick, pulling push that demands you stay present, like it's reminding you that rushing costs more than patience. And still, there are moments where it settles perfectly into place. In wet mud where other rifles start acting temperamental. In transitions from rooms to open ground where predictability is everything. In night work where a weak beam of light across the metal tells you it'll behave exactly the way it did yesterday. It isn't fond of tight corners. It doesn't love suspended water dust that clogs every surface. It becomes a burden when the task demands extreme lightness and quick vertical movement. But it stays not because it's flawless. It stays for the people who need quiet consistency, a familiar temperament that won't betray them when their hands need less elegance and more certainty. When the task shifts toward something more adaptable, when you're moving between vehicles, stairwells, and open courtyards without a break, the AK-74M with OBVs starts to make a different kind of sense. At first touch, it feels like the same old frame you've known for years. But the added rails, grips, and modern fittings change the way it sits in your hands. The balance becomes sharper, more centered, less front-heavy than the newer rifles, and that gives it a quiet confidence when you raise it fast. Controls stay familiar, nothing fancy, nothing trying to outsmart you. It doesn't charm you. It just feels like something you've already lived with, even if it's wearing a newer suit. Over time, though, you notice the quirks. The extra fittings add points that catch on straps and pockets. The weight shifts just enough to remind you that modernization rarely comes free. During long drills, it stays predictable, recoil mild, and stretched out rather than abrupt. But the rail systems heat fast, and you feel that through gloves during extended strings. It's not a weapon that vanishes on you. It always lets you know you're carrying it. Where it shines is in mixed environments. Dim basements where you want a steady front end. Rooftops where a simple adjustment on the rail gives you a clean sight picture. Cold mornings where the mechanism stays obedient even when your fingers lose feeling. It handles dust better than it should, forgives sloppy maintenance, and keeps its rhythm when you're shifting from sprint to kneel to prone in cramped, uneven spaces. But it hits its limits fast when you press into extreme close quarters. The bulk of the attachments becomes a liability, and every extra inch fights you at door frames. It also loses grace in fast vertical transitions, feeling wider and more stubborn than the lighter carbines. Still, it remains in rotation because it fits a certain mindset. People who grew up on older platforms but need the comfort of modern mounting options without giving up muscle memory. It stays for those who prefer familiarity dressed in new hardware, The kind of shooters who don't want to relearn the fundamentals when the old ones still keep them alive. When the environment demands tighter control during rapid movement, when hallways twist, footing changes, and every shot has to stay glued to the line. The A545, AEK971 steps into a different role altogether. The first thing you notice is the way it settles in the hands. Lighter at the nose, almost eager to move, with a balance that feels tuned for quick corrections rather than brute stability. It doesn't push back the way older rifles do. It sits closer to the body, ready to snap toward whatever corner your eyes land on. The controls feel familiar enough, but the internal rhythm is different, smoother in some ways, more mechanical in others, like a tool that wants you to understand its habits before it gives you its full trust. Daily use brings out the nuances. It stays calm during fast strings, but that calm comes with a reminder that the mechanism is always working under tension. You feel subtle vibrations through the stock, a hum that tells you the rifle is doing part of the job for you, but also that it expects you to keep a steady stance. In long training cycles, it stays manageable, less punishing on the shoulder. But the slimmer profile means it heats quicker, and the handguard can bite through gloves if you're not careful. Moving with it is easier. Door frames, low vehicles, narrow stairwells. It threads through those spaces with less resentment than heavier rifles. Where it truly comes alive is in tight, chaotic interiors, where sightlines change every second. Quick transitions feel natural. The rifle doesn't fight your pace. On uneven ground or layered urban structures, it gives you confidence to switch shoulders without needing a full reset. But it has its boundaries. It loses some authority outdoors when wind and distance start stretching shots, and the lighter front end demands more deliberate control on longer engagements. Dirt and fine dust can irritate its temperament. Not enough to make it fail, but enough to demand attention you might not want to give in a rush. Still, it stays in the racks for a specific type of shooter. The ones who move fast, think faster, and want a rifle that keeps up without dragging them backward. It's for people who value controlled speed over raw stability, who trust their hands more than the weight of the weapon. For them, it fits just right. A tool that rewards precision under pressure without asking for brute force. When the space tightens so much that long guns start to feel like anchors, the SR3 Vikhr becomes the kind of tool you reach for without overthinking it. It feels small the moment you pick it up. Compact, dense, almost abrupt in the hands, like it was built only for movement and nothing else. The balance pulls inward, not forward, and that changes your whole rhythm. The rifle wants to stay close to the body, wants to move with your shoulders, not ahead of them. Controls are direct, no frills, but the first impression is always the same. This isn't a general-purpose weapon. It's a key for very specific doors. In day-to-day use, it's honest about its limits. Recoil is sharp but brief, a quick pulse that disappears before it can pull you off target. The frame gets warm faster than you'd like, and the short barrel means the sound and flash feel closer, more personal, even with proper setups. It doesn't glide through long engagements. It's built for bursts, for moments where distance doesn't matter and reaction time does. Inside cramped interiors, in vehicles, in staircases where elbows scrape concrete, that's where it finds its purpose. It lifts fast, clears faster, and never asks you to wrestle it through a doorway. But step outside that bubble, and it starts to show its boundaries. Open ground exposes how quickly it runs out of reach, and windy weather demands more correction than you'd prefer. It's not meant for patience or long holds. It's meant for people who live in tight rooms, who rely on speed more than momentum, who need a weapon that doesn't slow their movement by even a second. For them, the Vikhr isn't just useful, it's the right tool at the right moment, a compact answer to close in problems. When silence matters more than presence, and you need a weapon that feels like an extension of your breathing, the VAL steps into the picture with a different kind of confidence. It feels heavier than its size suggests, dense through the middle, with a balance that settles low and steady. The moment you shoulder it, you understand what it's built for. Controlled movement, measured shots, work that happens without announcing itself. The controls are familiar enough, but the integrated system gives it a softer, muted recoil, more of a push than a snap, and that calmness becomes part of how you move with it. In routine use, you notice the quirks quickly. It doesn't like being rushed. It prefers short, deliberate work. The handguard warms sooner than you'd like, and the bulk near the muzzle makes it less agile in tight vertical shifts. But the payoff comes in places where noise and flash can ruin everything. Inside shadowed hallways, in cold forest lines, in slow night movement where every sound carries, the VAL stays composed. It keeps its rhythm even when your pulse doesn't. Push it into open ground, though, and it starts to feel sluggish, limited in reach and too specialized for anything long or wide. Still, it remains in the hands of people who value quiet control over versatility, shooters who operate in low light, slow approaches, and narrow windows where the first shot has to solve the problem without waking the whole block. For them, the VAL isn't optional. It's the tool that lets the job stay quiet. When you shift from rifles to something meant purely for tight corridors and fast hands, the PP 1901 Vikhr becomes its own kind of companion. The first thing you feel is the straightforwardness of it. No strange balance, no hidden temperament, just a compact frame that lifts cleanly and points exactly where you need it. It sits light at the front and firm at the rear, giving you a sense of control without fighting your movements. The controls are simple, predictable, almost workmanlike, and that familiarity settles in quickly. Day after day, you start to notice how honest it is about its capabilities. The recoil is mild, barely more than a steady pulse, and that lets you run fast pairs or short bursts without losing your line. But the simplicity shows its downsides too. The handguard warms sooner than modern designs, and the folding stock can feel stiff when you need quick adjustments. In tight interiors, stairwells, hallways, narrow vehicles, the Vikhr feels like it belongs there. It swings easily without over-travel, stays manageable in one-handed transitions, and doesn't punish you when you're moving with gear snagged on doorframes. Push it farther out, though, and the limits appear fast. Open ground exposes how narrow its comfort zone is, and poor weather makes its rhythm less forgiving. But it stays in rotation for a reason. It's for operators who live inside buildings, who value predictability over flash, who want a tool that behaves exactly the same on a bad day as on a good one. For them, the Vikhr isn't just a subgun. It's a steady hand in cramped spaces where everything else feels too big. When the work demands something even lighter, something that moves almost as fast as your eyes, the PP 2000 steps in with a very different feel. It's small to the point of seeming fragile at first, a narrow frame that barely fills the hand, with a balance that sits high and close. The moment you bring it up, you understand its purpose. Quick draws, fast corrections, movement that never slows down. Recoil comes as a short, clean tap, easy to manage even when you're shifting your stance mid-step. But the size cuts both ways. The grip feels cramped with gloves, and the weight is so low that every attachment changes the character of the weapon more than you'd like. Inside tight vehicles, cramped corridors, or low visibility entries, it moves like nothing else. No drag, no hesitation, just point and press. Outside that bubble, though, it loses confidence fast, feeling too light, too narrow in its comfort zone. Still, it stays with people who work close, who need speed over authority, who value a weapon that never slows their hands. For them, the PP-2000 is exactly what it needs to be, a fast answer in tight quarters. When you drop the pace and switch to a sidearm, the one tool that's there when everything else is tied up, the Glock 17 shows why it stayed in so many holsters for so long. The first feel is plain. A clean grip, a balanced slide, nothing begging for attention. It settles into the hand with a kind of quiet confidence, light enough to forget until you need it, steady enough to rely on without second-guessing. The trigger isn't dramatic, the controls don't surprise you, and that lack of personality becomes its strength. In daily work, it proves why people trust it. It fires when cold rain soaks through your gloves, when dust creeps into every fold of your gear, when your hands shake more from adrenaline than fatigue. The recoil is direct but manageable. A straight push that doesn't drag the sights far from where they need to be. It rewards calm hands, but it doesn't punish rushed ones. In cramped vehicles, jammed doorways, or moments where your rifle is out of position, the Glock opens a narrow safety margin that wouldn't exist otherwise. Its limits appear only when you ask it to reach beyond its lane. Anything past arm's-length situations, and you feel how small the platform really is. But that's not why it stays. It stays for people who prefer a sidearm that doesn't demand constant thought, who need something steady on the worst days rather than impressive on the best ones. For them, the Glock 17 is less a backup and more a quiet promise that there's still one tool left that won't argue with them when things go wrong. When you move to a sidearm built less for comfort and more for authority, the Yarrigan PYA meets you with a different kind of weight. It feels denser the moment it hits your palm, the balance sitting lower and heavier than polymer frames, giving it a grounded, almost stubborn presence. The controls are firmer, the slide feels tighter, and the trigger has a mechanical grit that doesn't try to hide what it is. Day to day, you learn its rhythm. The recoil comes back with more force, but in a straight, predictable line that keeps the sights from wandering too far. It demands a steadier grip and punishes sloppy handling more than lighter pistols. Yet that same firmness gives it a certain reliability in cold weather, or when your hands are already fatigued. In tight entries or vehicle work, it doesn't draw as smoothly as slimmer sidearms, but once it's out, it stays stable even through quick follow-ups. Push it into long holds or awkward shooting angles, and it starts feeling bulky. The weight dragging at your wrist, the frame refusing to disappear. Still, it remains with shooters who want a sidearm that feels like metal and not compromise. People who trust heavier tools because they've learned to work with their momentum instead of fighting it. For them, the PYA offers something straightforward, a pistol that doesn't flatter, doesn't negotiate, but stays honest in the hand when the room gets small and choices get thin.